Before we do anything with the database, let's do the buttons first. Like I said, we'll do them programmatically, and we'll display them in 2 rows. So there will be 13 buttons in 1 row, and then second row with the other 13 buttons. And each button will have a letter. The first one will be A, and the last one will obviously be Z. And we want to display these as soon as the form loads. So we'll do it on a form load event. So I'll double click the form. And the first thing we need to realize is that the button is just an object. It has its width and it has its position. So I'm going to create some variables. One will be btn width for the button width. It's going to be an integer obviously, and also btn left, which is the position of the button from the left. That's how they are being positioned on the form. And also btn top. This will tell us how far from the top the button will be positioned. So if you look at the form, we have the grid view and we want the button start here. So we want the top position from the form and the left position on the form. And we also want the btn height. So these are all just integers. Now, as far as the height, we can simply decide what it is now, because it's not gonna be really calculated. The width will be, because we wanna space them out evenly across the width of the form, but the height itself can be simply given. So I'm going to actually split this and create another integer for the height, and I'll assign it a value, and this is something that you just have to experiment with. So let's do 30 pixels, for example, but I misspelled it. It's btn height. So these are my parameters or properties for the button. So now let's determine the width of the button. So I want them in 2 rows of 13 across the width of the form. So my btn width will equal, and all I have to take is the size of the form, or the width of the form. So it's the client size, and you can see that it gets or sets the size of the client area of the form, which is our form. And we want the width of it, and we want to divide it by 13 because we want 13 buttons in a row. Now obviously this could actually give us a decimal number, but btn width is an integer, so it will simply disregard any decimal portion of that number. So next we have to decide where the buttons start. So our btn left, the left position of the button, well, it's going to start with the client size, width, because again we are positioning them across the whole form, minus, and now we have to multiply how many buttons we want. We want 13 buttons, and each of them has a certain width, and the width we just calculated, so it's gonna be 13 times the btn width. So we calculate the width of all 13 buttons, and then deduct that from the width of the form. So now we have to decide where from the top of the form it starts. So btn top, and what we want, if you look at the form, we want to take into account all the way from the top. We actually want to position it relative to the grid view. So if we move the grid view around, the buttons would still position relative to it. So you want to basically on the bottom of the grid view. So to calculate how far from the top it is, we'll take into account this small space, how far the grid view is from the top, and then the height of the grid view. So we'll add these two numbers together and we'll get the bottom of the grid view. And that's where our buttons will go. So we'll take the GRD books, we'll get its top position, and we'll add to it the height of the GRD books. So this is basically this bottom line over here. So we want the buttons to actually start a little lower than that. So we can add a few pixels, let's say 15 pixels. So now we have the width of the button, the position from the left and top, and now we can create a loop that will create 13 buttons in one row and then 13 buttons in the second row.